Let me share a little bit about Hari's incredible experiences. Hari Alluri identifies himself as he, him, Sia, and is the author of The Flayed City by Kaya Press in 2017. He's also the author of Carving Ashes, CICAC and Thompson Rivers, published in 2013, and the chapbook The Promise of Rest, published by Mouthfeel in 2016. He is the winner of the 2020 Leonard A. Slade and Junior Fellowship for Poets of Color and the co-founding editor of Locked Horn Press. He's received fellowships from the Vona/Voices and the Las Dos Brujas Writers Workshop.
Las Dos Brujas.
Thank you so much. And grants from the BC Arts Council, Canada Council for the Arts, National Film Board of Canada as well. His work appears in the Watch Your Head, Coach House, and Pandemic Solidarity, Pluto anthologies, as well as in the Anomaly Counterclock, Ovenbird, Prism International, Tinderbox, and elsewhere. Hari immigrated to Vancouver, Coast Salish territories at age 12, specifically in the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Kikay lands. Thank you so much. Since the age of 12, he has been writing and writing and writing. So as we journey with Hari today, I'm most excited to bring audiences to discover more of this poet's sensitivity to words, to his process, to his land, and other embodied experiences. Hari, you've been someone that I've been deeply inspired by, particularly as I was developing and awakening to the environmental degradations and wanting to do a piece on water, on the ocean. I was thinking more in response to watching a lot of documentaries related to how plastic has been so toxic to the wildlife. But when I discovered your poem, I really came into a much more expansive horizon of how to enter into an embodied awareness of what water symbolizes and how to personally integrate my own narrative with the grief I feel around an environmental degradation. Mm-hmm. So your poem facilitated that for me and catalyzed new questions that now I'm holding in my body. I don't have answers for, mm-hmm. but your poem created and facilitated the neural pathways to deeper yearnings to express the human experience of movement and loss and the ebbs and flows of the human condition. Hari, would you be able to share your ethnic background and mm-hmm. in terms of the various cross-cultural schemas that you navigate between?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so my mama is Filipinx. Her ancestry is Pangasinan and Ilocano. And my dad is South Asian from southern India, and his ancestry is Telugu. I was born in Ogbomosho, which is in Yoruba land in Nigeria. And those are like the primary kind of like intersections in terms of my like lineage and my birth that come up. You know, as we talked about earlier, I come to Coast Salish territory when I'm 12, you know, and I'm with some like departures and some very profound departures that have had big shape in my life as well. I come back to this land that isn't that to this land that I'm displaced on and displacing in my presence over and over again. So that would be, I guess, my short answer. Yeah, the question of land and the question of home is a large one. I hope that it is better responded to in the poem than I'm able to out loud. But maybe I'll just say that the question of home is an ongoing question. Mm-hmm. And there's a line from another poem that maybe comes up, my mom being from an archipelago. I say there's a line, something along the lines of, an island is a form of yearning. And I think that might be true.
Mm. So would you be so kind to share with us a little bit about how this poem emerged and what are some of the catalysts behind the inspiration of this writing?
I mean, this poem really, like, it began, a friend of mine, Christian Aldana, um, had done a call out for a fundraiser, and I just wanted to write in and say I wanted to be a part of it. I mean, the connection to community is that Christian Aldana and I become first connected through the Digital Sala, which is like a pan-planetary crew of Filipinx writers and artists who came together, so to speak, during the pandemic. At first to create a month-long series of like lit and I would say lit adjacent events, and continue to be in communication in other ways. And so something about their call pulled me to the page. And at the same time, I was also thinking about one of the cards in the Asian American Lit Review Tarot, Asian American Tarot card series. That is one of the things that brought me into conversation with tarot cards, which have been kind of like an ongoing obsession for me since then. And then other communications and other conversations I was having, and other poems I was reading. There's references in this work to a specific tarot card from Shauna Yang Ryan and Simi Kang. There's also like a very famous hip hop track called New World Water by Yassine Bey, formerly known as Mos Def. I'm thinking about Bruce Lee's notion of be water. And I was, rewatching that short video of him in which he's so beautiful. I was thinking about Juni Desil, who has a line in her new book, Eat Salt, Gaze at the Ocean. And the first time I heard it, it stopped my breath. The line goes, and I apologize, Junie, if I mess up this line. But let's talk about the ocean in the room. And she's specifically talking about the relationship of the ocean to the triangle slave trade, and the lives, generations, and communities deeply harmed in that moment whose harm is still ongoing. Conversations with and writing from Cynthia Dewi Oka, Amanda Fuller, Kim Mortal, Filipinx artist Kim Mortal, who has a line in one of their songs. I think it's in 88 and Beyond. If I'm wrong, please forgive me, Kim Mortal. That goes along the lines of queer like the water, resilient through trauma. And a Reiki session with poet and Reiki practitioner Shami Ali Naim. And a poem I found much later in Chris Santiago's book, Tulay, which is a word for poet, or poem, sorry, word for poem. And conversations with my partner Julay as well. And then there's also a relationship between this poem and another poem called Jungle at Voltage, from which I kind of like gathered the form and the inspiration of the piece. Very gladly, in relationship to all that conversation about like the digital sala, this poem will be coming out through Marias at Sampaguitas, which is like a amazing Filipinx run journal. And I just kind of like in those conversations, I listened. Um, and like you said, I didn't have any answers. I just wanted to keep asking questions about what the water might be, what the water might want to say to me in the moment that I was engaged with asking these questions, and in the ongoing moments of revision. There's the moment of impetus, and then the moment of revisioning that in which, as poets, we get to ask the poems we're working with, like, what else do you want? You know, what else do you want to say? How do you want to say it? What's the music you want to say it in? And you know, you hit on something in terms of poetry itself. To me, like, it feels in some ways like even in a single language, poetry is a form of an attempt at translation. You know, and translation's always partial. Translation's always incomplete. Um, Maybe we find something in that incompletion um, that helps us to traverse, or that helps us like engage um, with our questions and with our longings and with our yearnings, as you said. Um, because of a conversation with someone recently, I'm also thinking about, and you put it really well, you know, what you said about questions and is recalls me to something attributed to James Baldwin. Something along the lines of, you know, the work of the artist is to lay bare the questions that the answers have obscured. And hopefully that's something that's happening in this work. It's definitely something that happened to me in the process of writing it.
You know, more than ever, given the new normal of this post pandemic world, I'm curious to know, like, first of all, how has it affected you as a poet? And how are you holding both the grief that you're witnessing and sensing in the world and your, in a sense, of resilient hope?
Hmm. You know, on the one hand, um, because communities respond to crisis,
Mm.
and because I'm lucky enough to be parts of some badass communities who like to respond to crisis in creative ways that feed each other, you know, and nourish each other.
Mm.
My poetry has been opened, I think, in this time,
Open.
um,
Wow.
and the and that's got to do with these communities, you know. BIPOC writing community started by Faith DLA and Serena W. Lin begins like right in the beginning of pandemic
Mm.
and holds a space every Monday evening
Mm.
for BIPOC writers to gather,
Mm.
to write together, and then to share work with each other. And like I also think about this moment, like Yeva, who is a regular practitioner in the BIPOC writing community, an amazing human being. Um, you know, she said something about like, you know, in my world, like you live down the street, you know, and
Mm.
so like that's where the like the hopefulness and the joy is, or at least the joy, you know, in terms of the, I always think, thanks to Carla Bergman, um, about joy as like this idea of becoming more powerful together. And
Mm-hmm.
so like I feel like those communities are doing that. The community building artworks community,
Mm-hmm.
um, Aurora Masum Javed's The World We Want, writing gathering space, you
Mm.
know, these like spaces have opened up for writing, you know. Like I said, Seema Reza and the community building artworks crew. In the beginning of pandemic, I was going there like Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday mornings online. You know, it was like how I woke up. I'd
Mm-hmm.
wake up, make coffee, and then like write with folks. You know, and I've never looked forward to Mondays more than I do now. So like that's the way that, you know, my poetry has been affected. The other way is that I moved through some like stuff that I was working with. I moved through some like ego stuff, some like I had these like hopefullnesses and wants that weren't mine in terms of publication that like were coming up. And to tell the truth, it was like I'm also an admitted fan of martial arts and mixed martial arts. Like I have been a practitioner in the past. I don't practice enough to call myself one right now.
Wow, I
Um,
didn't know that.
but I,
Amazing.
hmm yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. And I will like fully admit that I had a joke. I would be like, man, I'd skip my own reading for a really good fight to watch a really good fight. Was my joke. Um, anyway, so like I was watching this martial artist after his bout, and he had like lost previously and then won this one, and they were like, what happened, what changed? And he's like, I fell in love with training again. And I realized that like the fighting part is the cost of getting to train.
Mm.
um, and I
The
decided
fighting part is the cost of the of the
like they
training.
learn growth and the like way you get to know yourself through training, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, that's my attitude. I was like, that's what I've been doing wrong. Like my attitude toward writing returns to um like the writing is the gift, and
Mm-hmm.
um sharing it is actually the cost.
Mm-hmm.
um Sharing it is the cost of getting to do that work and to ask those questions and to like do all the like the deep work of revision is an attending to ourselves and transformation of ourselves, I think and hope.
Mm-hmm.
um and that changed my that really shifted. That was during pandemic that happened. um and it was on the cusp of happening already. Like he sparked it. um like my like real like he crystallized the realization,
Mm-hmm.
but he reminded me that um like writing poetry has, and it's not an exaggeration and it's not a metaphor, like has literally saved my life in moments, you
Mm-hmm.
know. um I wrote myself out of a moment of uh deep and potentially permanent self-harm, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And um just going back to remember
Mm-hmm.
that and it was, this is about like maybe 3 or 4 months into pandemic when I watched that fight and had that realization.
Wow.
um and so like what had already been coming up for me was like, you know a lot of folks respond in different ways,
Mm-hmm.
and like my like truth response is I write more, and it's because I need to.
Mm-hmm.
And the sharing became less, and like the sharing out into the world in the form of publication became less and less important. There was like sharing in the moment with each other, excerpts, little pieces of what we were writing in our process and ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
and that's more intimate. And so yeah, it just became clearer and clearer that like I have to do this.
Mm-hmm.
um it is one of the things that keeps me on the planet, you know
Beautiful.
so even more than being a purpose, it's how I stay. It's how I stay
Beautiful.
here. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I appreciate it. I don't know if it's beautiful, but it feels close to true, if true is possible too.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate hearing just a very honest and candid response. I think it's important for the community to hear your truth.
Mm,
And some of the sharing that really resonated with me is one when you express that joy is when we feel strong together. And this idea in the time of the pandemic is where you have felt the incredible sense of the solidarity of your community, not just in the way that you're contributing as um, I would I would imagine as a mentor and as someone that's a more of a mature poet, but also in the sense of how you receive the energy of other poets, other aspiring writers that are building their craft. And it's such a beautiful way to define joy, that it's not singularity. It's not you have this pressure to like Google the self-help books that help you unlock joy. Implicit in all this is still the resiliency of searching for connection, even though we're stuck on this 2D platform so often now. And there's still so much beauty in the authentic conversation that's cultivated.
I want to acknowledge that I via Carla Bergman and Nick Montgomery, um, in their book Joyful Militancy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's how I come to this kind of that notion of joy is from Spinoza. So I don't get to keep credit for it, but I will keep quoting it all day because I love that one, and it resonates very closely with Filipinx notions of kapwa, um, a form of like community or the circle, relations beyond ourselves, um, and like in being inherently in relationship with each other,
Mm.
and the like that individual moment being, excuse me, being almost like a false moment,
Mm.
um, and also relations of ingat, which I had thought about before, was a notion of care, you know, which really became like the foundation through which the digital Sala crew worked with each other and worked within our own limitations, worked in relationship to our own capacities, and worked toward our own joys in relationship to each other's, like to joy,
Mm-hmm.
um, to collective joy,
Mm-hmm.
and that really had to do with care,
Mm.
and has to do with care, and so I really think that like I've been thinking a lot about that, like kapwa and care and joy in kind of like this triangular relationship with each other.
Beautiful.
And I think that really, like, that's where the strength is. That doesn't mean we don't go through our dark nights of the soul. um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think if there's one more thing I want to say about pandemic, it's that like something about it, about this, about doing all the work in pandemic in relationship to community and the self has kind of, I'm like trying to work harder on like knowing my cycles, you know
Mm.
and
By
like
cycles, what do you mean?
um just knowing my cycles of like outwardness and inwardness.
Mm.
um I'm a, to put it out astrological, I've got Leo with a Pisces rising, and
Mm.
Taurus is heavy in my chart as well. And so like I'm like, and then I'm like, oh, you know and I think I go through like actual cycles of it, and I also have like cycles of relationship to my boundaries and cycles of relationship to my monster,
Mm.
who very much comes up in relationship to my boundaries.
Mm.
And we're in these very small bounded spaces right now. you
Mm-hmm.
know
Mm-hmm.
um, and I just kind of realized in the last little bit, I don't know if this is true for other folks, but I mean, I realized in the last little bit that like my monster is like ready to go,
Mm.
um, on the new moon, like every new moon, like one
Mm.
is,
Mm.
and so I need to like set time aside as I move toward the new moon, and then on the new moon itself to like be
Mm.
less outward and be
Mm.
more inward, and also be attentive to my monster. In a conversation a couple of years ago before pandemic, um, we were talking about masculinity and monsters, and like in that conversation, I had this moment of thinking about like, yeah, the way like I will never be rid of my monster. I just need to spend safer time with my monster. That's like
Mm.
less, that involves less other people, frankly.
Mm.
Unless it's like a contained space where we're all holding that for each other and being available to each other in that way.
Mm.
Um, and so I'm like, okay, new moons. That's a time for my monster to hang out with me.
Mm.
It might be a time for writing. It might be a time for reflection.
Mm.
It's not a time for bringing myself to people. You know,
Mm. Mm.
yeah,
Beautiful to hear the deeper self-awareness of your energy level and your your kind of tides of being interior and more insular, or needing energy to be preserved for your creative development, or more extroversion and connecting and absorbing the energy of others. What I loved about your poem was the subtle integration of English and Tagalog.
Mm-hmm.
And I just also really see implicitly in the way that when we directed and recorded your oration of your poem, that there's a certain energy and rhythm and groove that you embody that speaks volumes, even though it's quite subtle.
Mm, thank
And
you.
my last question to you is, how does it feel when you go into the process of embodying your poem, orating your poem? And because I do believe this is such an incredible artistry in and that I would love to see it more embodied in other artists as well. And I'm learning that myself, given that I'm always stuck on the computer now. I'm trying very hard to intentionally find ways to be much more embodied.
Yeah. You know, I think that the way it works for me is that the embodiment is part of the revision and the writing process as well.
Beautiful.
And so like if music is a part of the writing, and then music is in the revision, and like I'm asking questions. If we ask questions with our bodies, you know, not just with our eyes and ears and brains, but with our actual moving bodies, um, with our multiple pulses, etc. And so like if the body is part of how we listen when we write, and when we and writing is like more. And I go to Maida Vang when I think about this. Like, she thinks about like multiple languages, rather than like having more tongues, we have more ears,
Mm.
you know? And so like if writing is a form of listening, and then if even the act of oration can be a form of listening,
Mm.
um, then I think that that moment of coming alive is
Mm.
just present for us. I hope.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Hari,
Thank
for
you.
this time of kind of intimate sharing. I want to say I really respect you in also offering of the vulnerable experience of what it was like in your dark hours of the soul. And mental health care is so important to the conversation at large, but particularly for sensitive artists that have special antennas in being able to tap into their own inner grief and a collective grief. So, for myself as a registered clinical counselor, I just want to honor that you are embodying and modeling a level of honesty and candid sharing that hopefully is growing this kind of normalizing that we're collectively suffering and grieving together, and hopefully that makes it more easier for others to share when they're going through darker days to someone, so that they're not isolated. So I want to honor that tender moment, and also just thank you for your resilience and for the ways in which you are watchful and entering into so many different layers of the human experience that helps, and through your poetry then helps us become more fully aware of our humanity. So thank you, Hari. Appreciate you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you. I feel like your attentiveness to these kinds of questions makes it easier to have the conversation, and I just want to honor that. And you know, I'll put poems are lucky to have readers and listeners like you.
Thank you. Shalom, blue shalom.
I'm
Thank you. Behold, become, belong.